Man hears strange noises coming from the basement. He's stunned when he sees what it is. Colton sat in his living room, enjoying the peace and quiet after a long day of work. The sun had set, and the soft hum of the evening filled the house. But then he heard something faint, almost imperceptible at first. A low buzzing sound. He paused, listening carefully, but it quickly faded away. It seemed like nothing, just the usual house noises, maybe the fridge or some pipes. A few days later, as he sat down to dinner with his wife, Renee, the sound returned. This time a little louder. Colton put down his fork and tilted his head, trying to figure out where it was coming from. Renee noticed and asked him what was wrong, but he waved it off, saying it was probably just the old water heater acting up again. But deep down it bothered him. Welcome back to PlotTwister. Before we unravel today's mystery, don't forget to like, subscribe, and click the notification bell so you're always in the loop. As the days passed, the noise continued, and it was getting harder to ignore. It wasn't constant, but when it came, it seemed to fill the air with an unsettling hum. Colton would hear it while reading a book or watching TV, and it seemed louder at night, almost like it was creeping up from beneath them. Renee noticed his growing discomfort but dismissed it, thinking it was just one of those harmless household quirks. One evening, as Colton lay in bed trying to sleep, the buzzing became impossible to ignore. It was louder than ever, and it was coming from somewhere beneath them. The basement. His heart raced as the noise persisted, a low, steady drone that didn't fit any appliance or device he could think of. Something wasn't right. He got up and walked through the quiet house, the noise following him as if it was alive. Standing at the door to the basement, he pressed his ear against the door. The buzzing was much clearer now, vibrating the wood beneath his touch. A chill ran down his spine. There was something down there, something more than just a faulty appliance, and it was growing louder. Colton hesitated at the basement door, his hand gripping the cold knob. The buzzing from below seemed to grow louder, more insistent, as if whatever was making the noise was waiting for him. His breath quickened, but he pushed the door open. The old hinges creaked as he flicked on the light. A dim bulb flickered to life, casting long shadows across the stairs. The hum filled the space louder than ever now. Slowly he descended, each step creaking beneath him. The basement had always been a bit eerie, a place they used for storage, cluttered with old boxes and forgotten items. But tonight it felt different. The air was thick and the noise seemed to vibrate through the walls. Colton scanned the room with his flashlight, trying to pinpoint the source of the unsettling sound. Then in the far right corner, his beam landed on something strange. At first he thought his eyes were playing tricks on him. A large dark mass clung to the wall. He moved closer, heart pounding in his chest. As the light hit it, the mass seemed to shift, alive with movement. His breath caught in his throat as he realized what he was looking at. It was a swarm. Hundreds, maybe thousands of bees clustered together in a wreathing, pulsing nest. The buzzing was deafening now, as the bees were angry, disturbed by the light and movement. Colton froze, his mind racing. How had this happened? How had they taken over without anyone noticing? The nest was massive, built into the wall, stretching in odd shapes and corners. He could see honeycomb patterns buried beneath the black cloud of bees. It looked like something out of a nightmare. And for a moment, all he could do was stare. Finally, the reality of the situation set in. This wasn't something he could handle alone. His pulse quickened as he backed away, careful not to make any sudden movements. The basement felt like it was closing in on him, the sound of the swarm filling his ears, drowning out his thoughts. He needed to get out now. The next morning, Colton stood anxiously by the window, waiting for the pest control expert to arrive. The unsettling image of the massive swarm in his basement replayed in his mind, and sleep had been impossible. Renee sat nearby, equally on edge. Every now and then, they both thought they could still hear that faint, eerie buzzing. Finally, a white truck pulled up in front of their house. A man stepped out wearing a calm expression that somehow reassured Colton. His name was Elias, a seasoned pest control expert who had seen it all. Or so Colton thought. Elias grabbed his equipment and made his way to the front door, offering a firm handshake and a calm nod as Colton led him inside. Colton led Elias down the stairs, the buzzing growing louder with each step, just as it had the night before. Elias was silent, his face unreadable, as he neared the corner of the basement. The beam from the flashlight hit the dark, shifting mass on the wall. For a long moment, Elias just stood there, studying the scene in front of him. Elias moved closer, his face now a little more serious. He crouched near the nest, careful not to make any sudden movements that might disturb the bees. He pulled out a tool to inspect the nest closer. But the longer he took, the more concerned his expression became. Colton stood nearby, watching every move, his stomach tightening. When Elias finally stood up and turned to Colton, there was a look in his eyes that made Colton's heart skip a beat. Elias spoke in a measured tone, explaining that this was no ordinary bee infestation. He couldn't say much until he made a few calls, but his tone was enough to send a shiver down Colton's spine. Elias told him they needed to leave the house immediately. Renee, overhearing from the top of the stairs, looked down with wide eyes. Colton didn't ask many questions. He just nodded and hurried upstairs. They gathered their kids, threw a few things into bags, and left the house in a rush, leaving behind the ominous hum of the swarm still filling the basement like a warning they hadn't yet fully understood. Colton and Renee sat in the living room of a relative's house, the atmosphere tense and quiet. The children were playing nearby, unaware of the unsettling situation their parents were facing. Colton checked his phone for the third time in an hour, waiting anxiously for an update from Elias. Each minute felt like an eternity, the weight of uncertainty hanging over them. Back at the house, Elias and his team were hard at work. They moved with precision, setting up equipment and carefully inspecting the basement. The nest was larger than Elias had initially thought, and the bees were becoming increasingly agitated. The buzzing was now almost deafening in the confined space. Every move Elias made had to be slow and deliberate. One wrong step and the entire swarm could be unleashed. Elias contacted a specialized team of experts to assist in the removal, explaining the severity of the situation. The process was delicate. The bees were not fully developed yet, but any disturbance could cause them to become aggressive. As the hours passed, the tension grew. The team suited up in protective gear, ready to remove the nest, but the challenge was daunting. At the relative's house, Colton's phone finally rang. It was Elias. His voice was calm but serious as he explained the complexity of the situation. The bees were more dangerous than he had anticipated, and they were still working to contain them. Colton felt his stomach drop. How close had they come to a potential disaster? His thoughts raced, thinking about his kids, their safety, and the home that now felt more like a threat than a refuge. As Elias and his team worked through the late afternoon, the risk of agitation grew. The bees were becoming restless, their buzzing intensifying. Slowly, methodically, Elias began the removal process. Each piece of the nest was carefully extracted, with the team maintaining strict control to prevent any sudden movements. It took hours of painstaking work, but finally they began to clear the basement. Colton received another call. The nest was out. Relief flooded through him, but Elias warned that the situation had been incredibly dangerous. They had made it just in time before things could have gone horribly wrong. The next morning, Colton and Renee returned to their house. The front door creaked open and the familiar scent of home filled their senses. But there was an undeniable tension in the air. The buzzing sound that had haunted them for days had gone, replaced by an eerie, almost deafening silence. The house now felt different. As they walked through the hallway toward the basement door, Colton's heart raced with the memory of what had nearly happened. Elias met them outside the basement, his face calm but still serious. He explained that the nest had been safely removed, and the bees were now contained far from the house. Colton nodded, his thoughts drifting back to the mass of bees, the relentless buzzing that had filled their home. They had come so close to something far worse, but for now they were safe. Renee took a deep breath, her relief visible. She thanked Elias, shaking his hand firmly, knowing that his quick actions had likely saved them from a disaster. Colton followed suit, but there was a lingering tension in his chest. The threat was gone, but the memory remained vivid in his mind. What if they hadn't investigated the noise? What if they had waited even a few days longer? Inside, the house felt almost too quiet. As they sat down in the living room, the events of the past few days began to settle. Renee looked at Colton and said, "I can't believe how close we were to something so dangerous." Colton nodded, the weight of the situation sinking in. If they hadn't heard the buzzing, or if they had ignored it, their family could have been in real danger. The kids, blissfully unaware of the danger, played in the yard, laughing and chasing each other. It was a stark contrast to the fear Colton and Renee had just experienced. Colton glanced out the window, thankful that they had trusted their instincts and taken action. The ordeal left them with a new sense of awareness. They promised each other that from now on, they would listen more closely to the odd noises. the subtle warnings that something might be wrong. They had escaped unharmed this time, and for that they were deeply grateful. But they would never take the peace and quiet of their home for granted again. What are your thoughts on the twist we uncovered today? Comment your ideas below. Make sure to like and subscribe for a daily dose of drama and mystery. See you later with another twist.